WhiskyCast. Proudly brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Join the Stillhouse at singlepotstill.com and receive an exclusive whiskey tasting journal.
Welcome to another episode of WhiskyCast HD. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this time around I'm on location at the Maker's Mark Distillery in Loretto, Kentucky, where we're looking at the first major change in makers in 5 decades. The lowering of the proof level from 45% ABV to 42% ABV. It's a move that's caused a lot of controversy.
Given that the brand, after many, many years of very predictable, steady growth, had spiked, and we just simply weren't prepared. We didn't have nearly the supply.
I sat down with Rob Samuels, Maker's Mark Chief Operating Officer, and the third generation of the Samuels family to run Maker's Mark.
This transition allows us to more closely meet the demand. There have been many instances where the shelves in package stores and bars have been empty, where our distributors have run really low on supply of Maker's Mark. And we got a lot of negative feedback about that as well. What we like more than anything is that we do have a very loyal group of consumers who are passionate about Maker's Mark, and they've come back to us with a lot of questions. And this was us taking the first step on this past Saturday to actually send out a note to our most ardent consumers. These are consumers that we think of as part of the Maker's Mark family, and we let them know what we were doing. That the taste profile has been very carefully maintained through this process, and ask them to come back to us with questions, which they have, and we've followed up at this point with every single consumer. A lot of the questions were we didn't anticipate were around some of the fundamentals of making bourbon, which are, when do you add the water, for instance? With the exception of a handful of barrel strength bourbons, for instance, every brand adds water after it comes out of the barrel, as you know, before it goes in the bottle. But we've got an iconic brand. It's all about taste as a single source of supply with limited options, and this allows us to more closely meet the demand while very carefully keeping guardianship of the taste profile.
How long was the process of deciding this? Obviously, it's not something you do overnight. It's not something you do in a month. This is something really, the shortage has really literally been years in the making, since you have to figure out 6 to 7 years ahead what your needs are going to be, right?
Well, what happened was, after the better part of 30 years growing very consistently, the growth really did shoot up almost overnight. And that caught us by surprise. And when you've got a lot more demand than supply, and shelves were dwindling, for instance, here in Kentucky, the majority of the retailers didn't have the most popular size on the shelf during the 2 busiest times of the year. We started getting a lot of feedback. But my father, myself, our tasting panel here at the distillery, and we shared the taste profile with hundreds of consumers in a triangle test, and they all validated that the taste profile matches the Maker's Mark standard taste profile. And our internal tasting panel confirmed that as well, and that's the reason Maker's Mark. We think that's the defining principle of Maker's Mark is the handmade process, which is exactly today the way it always has been, that delivers and creates the taste profile that has been the hallmark of Maker's Mark.
Who made the ultimate decision to start this process? Was this your call? Did it come from Beam Corporate in Deerfield? Who made the decision to change this?
Well, unique to our industry, given that we're a single source of supply, which means Maker's Mark has never purchased, sold, traded whiskey back and forth from any other distillery, and we know that our taste profile is only achieved within a very tight range of maturation in terms of years. We only had one option. And so we started looking at various proof levels or alcohol volume levels, and there were a couple of proof levels where the taste standard wasn't matched. And there was 42 proof, or 42% alcohol volume was did clear our tasting panel, which is what got myself and my father comfortable with this as an option, given the huge surge in demand. And this, as a brand, we've had a little bit more demand than supply for many, many years. This was historic growth. This was a growth level that the brand had never experienced. So this was really our only option.
Let's put that into numbers. Give me a number, because we know for many years that makers had been producing, for most years, approximately 1.5 million cases a year. And with the exception of a few years between 05 and 08 in that time frame, but when you're producing 1.5 million, and you could probably sell double that if you had it, what was the demand for it that prompted you that really put you into this position?
It was the U.S. Here in the United States, again, after very predictably growing steadily at 8 or 9%, through the 80s, through the 90s, through the first decade of 2000, the growth shot up significantly to a level that the brand had never experienced. And there's a lot of interest for Maker's Mark outside the U.S. in a lot of emerging economies and big cities in Europe, but the growth here in the U.S. was no one saw coming. And the category had grown from the most sluggish category within spirits to the fastest growing category of size within spirits, and that's happened within the last 18 to 24 months, and that's what accelerated our growth, the popularity of premium bourbon in particular.
One of the things I know that has been talked about for years here in Loretto, I remember being in the still house with Dave Pickerel back in 06, 07 time frame, and Dave talking about the plans he was putting together at that time to knock out the back wall and add essentially an additional distillery with additional fermenters, additional stills, and increasing the capacity at that point. And this was back close to 8-9 years ago. And that still hasn't really been done. Is that on the timetable to physically expand the distillery, and why did it take so long? If makers had been on allocation for so many years, why did it take so long to pull the trigger on expanding the capacity to where you could meet the demand?
Well, we doubled the capacity at Maker's Mark 10 years ago by replicating exactly our original distillery. So when folks visit Maker's Mark, when you step inside the distillery, it's as if you're looking into a mirror. And the reason that is because we created an exact replica of the original distillery, which has allowed us over the years to double the production while maintaining exactly the same process. So we've increased significantly the distillation. And I don't know if you noticed on the way into Loretto today, who would have ever dreamed in tiny Loretto, Kentucky, that you would see a crane like you only would see in Midtown Manhattan building a skyscraper. And that crane's not obviously building a skyscraper, but they're building warehouses. We are building more warehouses. We've created more than 100,000 new barrel warehouse spaces just in the last 12 months. And we continued to invest tens of millions of dollars to support growth here at Maker's Mark, to support growth the right way, to support growth where the taste is consistently managed over time. And the reason what created this environment for us was really no more complicated than the fact that Maker's Mark, the growth accelerated to an unprecedented level, a level that we as a brand, after many, many years of growth, had never even come close to experiencing.
I mentioned earlier the production levels at approximately 1.5 million cases a year. There are some TTB records that show that production actually fell significantly during the period between 05 and 08, down to around close to in the 900,000 case range. What happened during that time period, and why did production drop? Because that's the whiskey that pretty much would have been hitting the market over the last couple of years that might have helped alleviate some of the demand.
Well, the growth for Maker's Mark the consumer pull has stayed within a very consistent range, within about 7 or 8% every single year. And as we've thought about the opportunities around the world, that's something that we've been pretty careful to think about as we make the investments to grow and expand.
But why was the production level cut during that period and then brought back up to approximately 1.5?
It was as we thought about the opportunity for export markets. And the growth that we've seen here in the U.S. has been the real, that has created the environment where we've needed to make this decision. We've been very, very careful about making this decision, as you can imagine. Myself, my father, our tasting panel have validated that the taste is exactly to the Maker's Mark standard.
Let's talk about that for a second, because your father's famous catchphrase with every master distiller that's come through this door is "don't screw it up." And you alluded to that in the email that went out to ambassadors on Saturday. What was his first thought when you suggested that we're going to have to cut the ABV down to 42?
It was actually something that we thought about together and explored together, given that it's really the only option if you want to extend your supply more than extend your supply beyond our existing capabilities. It's really the only option. And he was focused, as we all were, which was let's find out if we can maintain the taste, exact same taste standard. And that's where we spent all of our time and all of our energy, was validating that with our own internal tasting panel and with hundreds and hundreds of consumers who drink Maker's Mark on a regular basis. And then, of course, we tasted various options and felt comfortable that the 42% allowed us to do that.
The new 42% Maker's Mark will appear on store shelves as supplies of the current stock run out.
Couldn't have done it better myself.
I haven't tasted it yet, and will wait to set up my own blind tasting before passing judgment. For more cask-strength conversation on whiskeys, with the people who make them and the people who drink them, join us each week for WhiskyCast. In Loretto, Kentucky, I'm Mark Gillespie.